The sun rose slowly over the Afghan desert, spilling burnt orange light across a U.S. Navy SEAL forward operating base tucked between mountains that looked like teeth. The air smelled of sand, diesel, and morning coffee. Lydia Meyer's coffee. She was already awake before dawn, as always. By the time the soldiers stumbled out of their bunks, rubbing the sleep from their eyes and cursing at the dust, Lydia was in her small, steel-walled kitchen, a thin figure in an olive-green apron, moving like a ghost through the haze of sizzling pans. Her hair was tied back neatly, streaks of gray showing beneath the bandana. She was in her 50s, maybe a little older, though no one dared to ask. To the SEALs, Lydia was just Ma, the cook, or sometimes Chief Chow. She wasn't military, technically a civilian contractor sent by a logistics company to provide meals. But there was something about her that didn't fit the role. Most civilian workers flinched at every explosion, ducked when choppers flew too low. Lydia never did. "Morning, Ma," said Corporal Diaz, his grin half asleep as he shuffled into the mess tent. "Coffee's hot." "Don't waste it," she replied, her voice calm, low, and steady. Diaz filled his mug and took a sip. "You know, one day you're going to tell us what kind of magic beans you use." "Same as always," she said, her lips twitching with a hint of a smile. "You just never stop complaining long enough to taste it properly." The room filled with soft laughter. The base was small, 20 men, 2 Humvees, and a whole lot of dust, and Lydia was the closest thing they had to peace. She listened when they talked about home, about girlfriends, about the kids they missed. She laughed when they joked, scolded them when they cursed too much, and fed them like they were her own. But LT, Jack Rains, the commanding officer, saw something different. He often came early, before the others, and watched her from the doorway, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. Lydia's movements were too precise, too practiced. She measured everything by instinct, organized every tool by touch. Even the way she carried a knife, flipping it from hand to hand without looking, had the rhythm of training behind it. "Couldn't sleep again?" she asked one morning, without turning around. "How do you know?" Rains replied, stepping inside. "You always walk heavy when you're tired," she said, flipping a pan of eggs. "Makes the floor creak different." Rains smirked. "You pay too much attention." "Old habit," she murmured. "Paying attention keeps people alive." He leaned against the counter, watching her stir a pot. "You've been around soldiers before, haven't you?" She froze for a heartbeat, then kept stirring. "Once or twice." That was all she said. Lydia never talked about her past. Some said she had a son in the Marines, others whispered she'd lost someone overseas. No one really knew. But they all felt something, a quiet strength that didn't come from cooking. When the choppers took off for missions, Lydia waited by the mess tent door, arms crossed, face unreadable. She'd stand there long after the sound of rotor blades faded, staring into the dust. And when the team returned, bruised, bleeding, laughing like they hadn't just cheated death, she was waiting with hot food and a look that said more than words ever could. To the men, she became part of their rhythm. War had its own heartbeat, and Lydia's presence was one of its steady notes. Still, small things didn't go unnoticed. Once, during an unexpected blast near the perimeter, the camp shook violently. Most civilians ducked under tables, but Lydia didn't move. She simply set down the knife she was using, turned off the stove, and walked outside to make sure the water line wasn't hit. When Rains saw her, his jaw tightened. She looked calm, too calm. "You're not afraid of much, are you?" he asked later. "Fear's useful," she said, cleaning her hands with a towel. "It keeps you alert. Panic gets people killed." Rains nodded slowly. "You sound like a soldier." "Used to be," she whispered under her breath. He wasn't sure he heard her right. and she didn't repeat it. That night, the camp went quiet early. Most men slept light. War trained them to. But Rains couldn't sleep. He walked to the kitchen again. The door was slightly open, light flickering through the cracks. Inside, Lydia sat alone, sharpening a knife. Not a kitchen one, a combat blade, long and balanced. Her expression was distant, haunted. Couldn't sleep either? He asked, his voice soft. She didn't look up, just keeping things sharp. Rains stepped closer. You know, my dad used to say that same thing. Before missions. He was Army. She stopped, eyes lifting slowly. Was? Yeah, Rain said. I lost him when I was a kid. A silence stretched between them. The generator hummed outside. Lydia set the knife down, folded her hands over it. I lost someone too, she said finally. Different war. Same emptiness. Rains wanted to ask more, but her tone made it clear the conversation was over. Get some rest, Lieutenant, she said quietly. You'll need it soon. He left, uneasy. Somehow, she always knew when something was coming. The next morning, the sky looked bruised. Clouds hung heavy over the mountains, wind carrying the scent of dust and rain, rare in this region. The radio crackled with static, then a voice broke through. Recon team spotted movement. Possible hostiles 2 clicks out, West Ridge. The camp tensed. Soldiers grabbed gear, checked weapons. Lydia watched from the mess hall doorway, her eyes narrowing toward the horizon. You should stay inside, Ma, Diaz said, jogging past with his rifle. I'll be fine, she replied. You boys just watch each other's backs. She turned and went back inside, but her mind wasn't on the food. Her hands moved automatically as she cooked, though her ears stayed tuned to every sound outside, every shout, every bootstep, every distant rumble. On the shelf above her stove sat a small metal box. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside was a folded marine patch, a silver bullet casing, and a faded photograph of a man in uniform. Her late husband, Sergeant Daniel Myers. She looked at the photo for a long time. Seems it's coming back again, huh, Danny? She murmured. Can't stay out of it forever. She closed the box and slid it back into place, her jaw tightening. Outside, the sky thundered, not from weather, but from artillery testing in the distance. Lydia didn't flinch. Instead, she poured herself a cup of coffee and stared out across the desert. She wasn't a soldier anymore. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. But deep down, Lydia Myers knew something she hadn't told anyone. The war doesn't forget its own. It waits, and soon she'd be reminded just how far she'd really come from that life. The days in the desert passed like the ticking of a slow, stubborn clock. Morning sun, noon heat, night silence, always the same. To the SEALs, every dawn felt identical until the next mission order arrived. But for Lydia Myers, sameness was a kind of mercy. Routine gave her something to hold on to, a rhythm that kept old ghosts quiet. At 0500 hours every morning, she was already up, frying bacon in the mess tent, humming a tune no one recognized. She measured out rations with perfect accuracy, never wasting a crumb. She never rushed, never panicked, never complained. It was as if she'd learned to live inside the noise without letting it touch her. Ma, you ever sleep? Corporal Diaz asked one morning, yawning as he dragged himself to the counter. Lydia gave him that small half-smile that made her eyes narrow just a bit. Sleep's for people with nothing to remember, she said, setting down his plate. Diaz blinked. That's heavy for 6 in the morning. She shrugged lightly. Then chew slower. Might help it go down easier. The men around the table laughed. She had that way about her. Firm, but kind. They teased her, but they respected her too. In a place where every sound outside the wire could mean death, her calm was the only thing that felt steady. Lieutenant Jack Rains sat alone at a corner table, watching her as he ate. He wasn't the type to dwell on things, but Lydia fascinated him. She was too composed, too sharp, for someone supposedly hired to cook. Her posture, her awareness, it was muscle memory. Military, through and through. He'd seen her one afternoon when a supply truck rolled in. The driver, a fresh recruit, dropped a crate on her foot. The kid stammered, terrified he'd broken something. Lydia didn't even curse. She shifted her weight, lifted the crate with both hands, and set it down gently as if it weighed nothing. The driver stared in disbelief. Rains saw it then. The strength in her, the quiet kind that came from years of training and maybe a lifetime of carrying more than she said. By evening, the camp would settle into silence. Most nights, Lydia sat by herself outside the mess hall, peeling potatoes or mending torn uniforms. The desert sky above stretched wide and endless, the stars sharp enough to hurt your eyes. Private Harris once joined her, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "You mind if I sit, ma'am?" he asked. Lydia didn't look up. "If you're quiet." He sat anyway, staring into the dark. "You ever get used to it? The noise, the waiting." "You don't," she said softly. "You just learn which thoughts not to feed." He nodded, unsure what she meant. She glanced at his trembling hands and took the cigarette from him. "This helps for 5 minutes," she said, flicking the ash. "Then it owns you." She handed it back, stood up, and disappeared inside. Harris sat there long after, wondering how she could read people so easily, like she'd known soldiers all her life. The next day brought another mission briefing. Insurgent activity was rumored near the mountain ridges west of the base. The SEALs geared up, double-checked weapons, and prepared to move at dawn. Lydia stood at the mess counter, quietly packing energy bars and canteens into their bags. "Ma, you don't have to do that," Rain said as he passed through. "I know," she replied without looking up. "But you'll forget food the minute the radio crackles." He smiled faintly. "You act like you've been on ops before." Her answer was simple. Too simple. "I know how soldiers think." Rains wanted to ask more, but something in her tone told him not to. There was a wall around Lydia, one built from loss and silence. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the radio tower caught a message encrypted chatter that made the analysts nervous. The camp tightened security, sandbags repositioned, guards doubled. Inside the kitchen, Lydia kept working. Her knife moved in a smooth rhythm, slicing onions with mechanical precision. But her eyes kept flicking toward the window, scanning the darkness beyond the fence. Diaz walked in, yawning. "You good, Ma? You look like you're listening for ghosts." "Just the wind," she murmured. "But the wind tells stories, if you know how to hear it." He chuckled. "You're full of strange sayings, you know that?" Lydia gave a quiet laugh. Strange times make strange people. After dinner, she cleaned the kitchen alone. The others were at the barracks, playing cards or writing messages home. Lydia reached under the counter and pulled out a small cloth bundle she kept hidden. She unfolded it carefully. Inside lay a dog tag, edges worn smooth from time. The name was nearly rubbed away, SGT Daniel Myers. She traced the letters with her thumb. "Still keeping watch, Danny," she whispered. She'd buried her husband 13 years earlier, after his convoy was ambushed in Iraq. No body recovered, just fragments. After that, she'd left the Marines, vowing never to touch a weapon again. Cooking became her refuge, a way to serve without fighting. But peace, she'd learned, was never permanent. Outside, thunder rolled again. Except it wasn't thunder. It was something distant, heavy, metallic. Her pulse quickened. Not yet. she whispered to herself. Not tonight. Near midnight, a generator failed, plunging part of the camp into darkness. The hum of the lights died, replaced by soft footsteps and the crackle of static on the radio. Lydia reached for a flashlight, but then stopped. She could move through darkness just fine. She stepped outside, the moonlight cold and thin. The air was still. From the shadows, a voice startled her. "Ma? That you?" Corporal Diaz. He was heading back from sentry duty. She turned, the beam of his flashlight hitting her face. "Yeah," she said. "Power's out. What are you doing up?" he asked, lowering the light. "Can't sleep," she answered. "Never liked quiet." He nodded, then hesitated. "You sure you're okay?" "You're shaking." She glanced down at her hands. They weren't shaking. They were steady as stone. But next to her on the table lay a piece of cloth she just unfolded. A rifle cleaning kit, old and neatly kept. Diaz blinked. "Wait, that's not kitchen gear." "Old habits," she said softly, wiping the metal rod. "They don't die easy." He wanted to ask more, but the look in her eyes stopped him. There was something there, not danger, but history. Something deeper than he could understand. "Get some rest, Corporal," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He nodded slowly and walked off, glancing back once. She was already reassembling the rifle, her hands moving with the certainty of memory. When morning came, the world felt wrong. The wind had shifted, bringing with it the smell of smoke and burnt oil from somewhere unseen. The radio hissed. Patrol Bravo reporting possible movement near the southern ridge. Coordinates inbound. Rains ordered the team to high alert. Men scrambled, weapons checked, eyes sharp. Lydia watched them from the doorway, expression unreadable. She felt it in her bones, that quiet before chaos, the same silence she'd felt years ago, before everything she loved had gone up in flames. She poured coffee for the lieutenant as he passed. "Long day ahead," he said. "They all are," she replied. He took the cup and paused. "You ever get used to it?" She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "No one does. You just learn which part of yourself to silence first." When the men left for reconnaissance, Lydia stood at the door, watching until their silhouettes disappeared over the ridge. She whispered something no one heard. A prayer, maybe. Or a promise. She turned back inside, put on her apron, and started preparing lunch like always. To anyone watching, she looked like just another worker doing her job. But her mind was already elsewhere, calculating ranges, remembering old maps, replaying training drills buried under years of dust. Something was coming. And deep down, Lydia knew she wouldn't be just the cook for much longer. The desert has its own language. Every sound, every silence, every gust of wind meant something. Lydia Myers had learned to listen to it long before she came here. By the third week of tension, the air around the base grew heavy with unease. The radio tower picked up encrypted chatter short, clipped signals, then nothing. The intelligence officer said it might be nothing more than interference. But Lydia knew better. The desert didn't go quiet without reason. Every morning, she watched the horizon while the coffee brewed, her hands steady but her eyes never still. The men joked around her as usual, laughing too loudly, trying to ignore the fear that lived under their skin. She didn't laugh with them anymore. Something in her gut told her the peace wouldn't last much longer. The mess hall had become the camp's only sanctuary, the one place that smelled like home instead of war. Lydia scrubbed the metal counters, listening to boots thumping outside and the distant hum of vehicles. When Corporal Diaz appeared at the doorway, she could tell by his face he was nervous. "Intel says enemy movement near the ridge again," he muttered. "Rains doesn't like it. Too quiet out there." Quiet's the worst sound in a war zone, she replied without looking up. He frowned. How would you know? Lydia's rag froze mid-wipe. She looked up slowly. Because silence always means someone's waiting. Diaz opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. Something about the way she said it soft, certain, like a memory made his stomach twist. You were military once, weren't you? He asked carefully. She turned back to her cleaning. Once, she admitted, voice low. A long time ago. That was all she said, and Diaz knew not to ask again. That night, the wind changed direction. The smell of dust and oil drifted in from the west, where the mountains loomed like silent watchers. The power flickered again, plunging half the base into shadow. Lydia didn't bother lighting a candle. She moved through darkness as if she belonged to it. In the mess hall's dim corner, she opened the old metal box again, the one she hadn't touched since Iraq. She took out her husband's dog tag, rubbing the worn letters between her fingers. Daniel Myers. She remembered the day they told her he was gone. She remembered the flag, the salute, the way the world had sounded hollow afterward. That was the day she left the Marines, trading a rifle for a frying pan. But even then, she'd known the war wasn't done with her. It never really was. Her fingers brushed over a small cloth inside the box. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a folded cleaning rag and an old, well-maintained M40 sniper rifle scope. She'd kept it all these years, one relic of a life she swore she'd buried. She sighed, staring at it for a long time. Then she wrapped it up again and tucked it away. Not yet, she whispered. Not again. Morning came early. The SEALs geared up for another patrol. Lydia stood by the doorway, handing out ration bars, making sure each man had something in his pocket. Don't go playing hero today, she warned Diaz with a faint smile. Hey, if I get shot, I expect extra bacon when I get back, he joked. Then you'd better stay alive to ask for it, she replied, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. Lieutenant Raines approached, pulling on his gloves. We'll be back by nightfall, he said. Unless you're not, Lydia replied quietly. Raines gave her a look half surprised, half amused. You always this optimistic? Realistic, she corrected. And realists are rarely surprised. He shook his head with a grin and climbed into the Humvee. Lydia watched until the dust swallowed them. Hours later, the camp was restless. Lydia moved between tasks, restless herself. She washed, scrubbed, stirred, but her attention was fixed on the horizon. Each gust of wind seemed heavier than the last. The radio operator inside the command tent cursed under his breath. They've gone dark again. I can't get a signal from Raines' team. Lydia froze mid-step. Could be terrain interference, the young operator said, though his tone betrayed doubt. She knew that tone. She'd heard it from soldiers too many times before. It was the sound of denial. She went back to the kitchen, forcing herself to focus. But her hands trembled now. Her calm had cracks. The ghosts were whispering again. When night fell, the patrol still hadn't returned. Lydia kept the lights on, coffee hot, plates ready. She didn't speak a word to anyone. At midnight, headlights appeared in the distance. The sound of engines grew closer, and soon the SEALs stumbled back through the gates, dusty, exhausted, and shaken. Raines' face was tight. 2 wounded, 1 KIA, he said to the medic, voice heavy. Lydia didn't ask who. She didn't need to. She saw the blood on Diaz's boots and knew enough. They brought the body bag into the corner of the mess hall until morning transport could arrive. Lydia stood there quietly, wiping her hands on her apron. Then she walked over and knelt beside it. The men watched, silent. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She just rested her hand on the bag and whispered, "You're home now." That night, No one ate. The next morning, Lydia found Diaz sitting outside the tent, staring into the distance. His face was pale, eyes red. "You did what you could," she said gently. He shook his head. "It was an ambush. They were waiting for us. We didn't see it coming." Lydia looked toward the hills. "That's because you are watching the wrong places." "What do you mean?" She pointed. "See that ridge line? It gives a perfect line of sight into the road. No one hides in open valleys. They hide where the wind covers their breath." Diaz stared at her. "You sound like a sniper." She looked away. "I was." He blinked. "You're serious?" She sighed and finally faced him. "Corporal, there's a lot about me you don't need to know. Just understand this. People like me don't stop seeing patterns. We just try to forget why they matter." Before he could reply, the radio crackled again. More movement detected near the southern pass. That night, while the others slept, Lydia sat alone under the pale moonlight. The desert was eerily still. She could hear her own heartbeat. She opened the box once more. The rifle parts gleamed faintly in the dim light. One by one, she began to clean and assemble them, hands steady, movements smooth as water. When she was done, she stared through the scope at the far-off ridge, eyes narrowing. The world through the lens was quiet and sharp, just like it used to be. Then, somewhere far in the distance, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Just a shimmer of light. But to her, it meant everything. Someone was watching. The next morning, Rains found her standing outside the mess hall, rifle slung low and covered by a tarp. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, his tone firm. Lydia met his gaze calmly. "Preparing. For what?" "For what's coming," she said. "You can feel it, can't you?" Rains hesitated. He wanted to say no, but he couldn't. The wind blew harder that morning, carrying the smell of something unfamiliar. Gun oil, smoke, and danger. Whatever Lydia sensed was real. And in her bones, she knew the silence of the desert was about to be broken. Very soon, one shot would echo across that barren field, a shot no one would ever forget. Dawn came late that day, hidden behind a wall of dust. The horizon was bruised with orange and ash, and the desert wind carried a strange, metallic smell. Even the birds were gone. Lieutenant Rains stood near the command tent, scanning the map for the 5th time. His jaw was tight, his coffee untouched. "We've got chatter from recon," the radio operator said. "Movement near the southern pass. Small numbers, maybe a scouting unit." "Or bait," Rains muttered. He looked out toward the mess hall, where Lydia was cleaning her counters as usual, her movements methodical. It would have seemed ordinary if she weren't already fully dressed, boots laced, eyes hard and focused. He knew she felt it too. The pressure. The quiet before something bad. By mid-morning, the SEAL team was ready to roll out. Rains gave the orders with calm authority, but every man sensed the tension bleeding into his voice. "Keep your eyes open. We're not walking into another surprise," he said. Lydia stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron, watching them load the vehicles. "Lieutenant," she called. He turned. "Don't take the main road," she said. "If they've studied your routes, that's where they'll wait." Rains frowned. "And how would you know that?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon. "Because that's what I'd do," she said softly. Rains hesitated. Something in her tone carried more authority than any officer's rank. He finally nodded. "All right, we'll shift north along the ridge." She gave a small nod and turned back toward the kitchen, but he could tell she wasn't really focused on cooking anymore. The convoy moved out, leaving a trail of dust that hung in the air long after they vanished. The base fell quiet. Lydia watched from the doorway, heart heavy. She'd seen men go out with that kind of energy before, the tightness in their shoulders, the forced jokes, the hollow smiles. She had a bad feeling about this one. Hours crawled by. The wind picked up, sweeping across the plain in low, mournful howls. Lydia tried to distract herself, washing dishes, preparing stew, but every clatter of metal made her flinch. Then the radio crackled. "This is Echo One. We've got eyes on, static." Then silence. Lydia froze, her breath caught in her throat. The radio operator adjusted dials frantically. "They're jammed again. Can't raise them." And that was when it happened. A thunderous explosion echoed across the desert, distant but clear. A plume of smoke rose from the direction of the ridge. Someone screamed, "They're under attack." The base erupted into chaos. Soldiers scrambled for weapons, medics prepared for casualties, and the radio room turned into a storm of overlapping voices. Lydia stood perfectly still, eyes locked on the smoke. She could almost hear it, the rhythm of gunfire carried on the wind. She didn't think. She moved. Within minutes, she was inside her small quarters, tearing open the metal box beneath her bed. The M40 sniper rifle lay there, gleaming like an old secret that refused to die. Her hands worked automatically, assembling it piece by piece. She tied back her hair, slipped on her old combat vest, and tucked Daniel's dog tag beneath her shirt. For the first time in years, she wasn't just the cook. She was Sergeant Lydia Myers, Marine Corps sniper, 2nd Recon Battalion. She emerged from her quarters armed and silent. The soldiers stared as she strode toward the armory. "Ma'am, you can't," one of them began, blocking her path. Lydia gave him a look that could freeze fire. "Either you hand me ammo, or I'll take it myself." The young man hesitated, then stepped aside. He saw it in her eyes, the kind of stare that belonged only to someone who'd lived through hell and learned to walk back out. Minutes later, she was in a jeep, rifle strapped to her back, driving toward the ridge. The road was rough, scattered with sand and shrapnel, but Lydia drove with steady precision. As she neared the battlefield, the sound of gunfire became clearer, bursts of automatic fire, then the sharp ping of metal against stone. Through her scope, she saw them, the SEALs pinned down behind a cluster of rocks, bullets cutting through the air around them. One of the vehicles was smoking, its engine on fire. Rain's voice crackled faintly through her comms. "We're surrounded." Ambush from both sides. Lydia parked behind a dune, dropped prone, and set up her rifle. Her breathing slowed, long inhale, steady exhale. She scanned the ridge. Their movement. A glint of sunlight on glass. Enemy sniper. She adjusted the scope, centered the crosshair, and squeezed the trigger. Crack. The shot echoed like thunder. The enemy sniper dropped instantly. The SEALs looked up in confusion. Another glint, right flank, near a truck. She fired again. Crack. Another hostile down. Within seconds, the rhythm of the battle changed. The attackers began to panic, unsure where death was coming from. Lydia shifted position, her shots methodical and merciless. Rain's voice came through again. "Whoever's covering us, keep it up." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her bullets spoke for her. The firefight lasted nearly 20 minutes, though it felt like a lifetime. When the dust finally settled, silence returned, the kind of silence that only comes after death has passed through. Rain stood slowly, scanning the ridge. "Clear," he called out. Diaz limped forward, bleeding from his shoulder. What the hell just happened? Someone saved our skins. Rains looked toward the distant dune. Through the haze, he saw a figure, small, steady, rifle in hand. "No way," he murmured. "That's Myers." When Lydia finally walked down from the dune, her rifle slung across her shoulder, the men just stared. Her calm was unnerving, like the storm had passed through her instead of around her. Rains approached her slowly. "That was you?" She gave a small nod. "You were surrounded. I did what I had to do." "You just took out an entire ambush team," he said, half in disbelief. Lydia shrugged. "They were sloppy." Diaz grinned through the pain. "Guess our cooks got better aim than the rest of us." She gave a faint smile, then knelt beside a fallen seal, closing his eyes gently. "No one should die hungry," she murmured. "He'll have a meal waiting on the other side." They rode back in silence. The desert stretched endlessly, the horizon now smeared with fading smoke. At the base, medics rushed to the wounded. Rains followed Lydia as she headed back to the mess hall. "You trained as a sniper?" he finally asked. "Marine Corps," she said quietly. "Long time ago. And you quit to cook?" She gave a soft laugh, bitter and tired. "You can only look through a scope for so long before you forget what faces look like up close." Rains didn't reply. He understood in a way words couldn't express. She poured him coffee without asking. "Tomorrow they'll come again," she said flatly. "And they'll be smarter. You'd better be ready." He looked at her. "Will you help us?" She hesitated. Her fingers brushed Daniel's dog tag beneath her shirt. "If I have to," she said. That night, as the base settled into uneasy silence, Lydia cleaned her rifle one last time. The desert wind carried faint echoes, ghosts of war, memories of her past, and the knowledge that this wasn't over. She placed the weapon beside her bed, stared at it for a long time, and whispered, "You and I have one more fight left in us." Outside, lightning flashed across the horizon, silent, distant, foreboding. The storm was coming, and this time Lydia Myers wasn't going to hide from it. The desert never sleeps, it only waits. In the dark hours before dawn, the air around the base was unnaturally still. The wind had died, and the stars hung low, dimmed by the haze of smoke and dust. Somewhere out there, in the endless sand, the enemy was gathering. Lydia Myers could feel it. She stood on the rooftop of the mess hall, mug of black coffee in one hand, her sniper scope in the other. The metal was cold, the air colder. Below her, the camp stirred with quiet movements, men loading magazines, checking gear, whispering prayers they'd never admit to saying. Rains walked up beside her, wearing the same fatigue and tension that hung over everyone. "Intel says they're regrouping," he said, voice low. "Satellite caught heat signatures 10 miles east, too organized to be random." "They'll hit before sunrise," Lydia replied without hesitation. "They'll want to catch you tired." Rains sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "How do you always know?" "Because this isn't my first storm," she said simply. By 0500 hours, the base was awake and armed. Patrols rotated across. The perimeter and spotlights scanned the desert in slow, sweeping arcs. But the silence felt wrong, heavy, watchful. Inside the mess hall, Lydia moved with purpose. She wasn't cooking now. She was preparing, checking her weapon, reloading, sharpening the knife she kept hidden behind the counter. Diaz limped in, arm bandaged, exhaustion written all over him. "You're really staying in the fight, huh?" "I'm not leaving anyone hungry," she said without looking up. He chuckled weakly. "I don't know whether to be comforted or terrified." "Both," she said, finally meeting his eyes. "That's how survival feels." The first explosion came at 0537. A flash tore through the eastern fence, followed by the deafening roar of mortar. The ground shook, tents ripped apart, alarms wailed through the camp. "Contact! Contact east side!" Someone shouted over the comms. Rains grabbed his radio. All units defensive positions now. Lydia was already moving. She sprinted to the roof, rifle slung tight, the wind whipping dust across her face. Through her scope, she saw shadows spilling across the dunes. Dozens of them, maybe more, moving fast, coordinated. This wasn't just a raid. It was a full assault. She steadied her breathing. "One shot at a time," she murmured. Her first bullet hit the lead gunner on a truck-mounted machine gun. He dropped instantly, the vehicle veering off course. Another enemy scrambled to take his place. Crack! Another down. Each shot was precise, timed with deadly rhythm. Below her, the SEALs fired back, returning rounds with ferocity. The base turned into chaos, explosions blooming like fireflowers across the sand, bullets streaking through the air. Inside the chaos, Diaz dragged 2 wounded men toward cover. "They're flanking us on the west," he yelled. Rains barked into his comm. "Move Delta Team to the left trench now." But the comms crackled with static. The signal was jammed again. Lydia cursed under her breath. She switched to her backup frequency, an old one she remembered from her Marine days, and patched directly into Rain's headset. "Channel Bravo 1 is clear," she said. Rains froze. "How the hell did you?" "No time," she cut in. "They're pushing from the ridge. I've got eyes on their marksmen. Give me 10 seconds. She pivoted her scope and found the sniper, half hidden behind a dune, scanning for targets. "Got you," she whispered. Crack. The man collapsed before he could fire a second shot. "Sniper down," she said calmly. "Left flank clear for now." Rains exhaled hard. "Remind me to never question your instincts again." Minutes stretched into hours. The sun climbed higher, burning the battlefield in blinding light. Smoke and sand blurred everything, but Lydia kept shooting, moving between positions, her face streaked with dust and sweat. At one point, she saw Diaz pinned behind a supply truck, 3 hostiles closing in. Without hesitation, she dropped to a knee, adjusted her aim, and took them out one by one, her bullets cutting through the chaos like whispered vengeance. When Diaz looked up and saw her on the roof, he gave a weak thumbs up. She nodded back, expression unreadable. But she was running out of ammo. By noon, the camp was half destroyed. The mess hall's windows were shattered, smoke curled from the vehicles, and the medical tent overflowed with the wounded. Lydia jumped it down from the roof, landing hard, her knees jolting with pain she ignored. She scavenged extra rounds from fallen soldiers, reloaded, and pushed toward the command post. Rains was there, barking orders, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "They're breaching the south wall," he shouted. "Then we take the fight to them," Lydia replied, grabbing a spare grenade belt. "You're not SEAL," he snapped, half out of reflex. She met his gaze with a fire that silenced him. "No, I'm the reason you're still alive." And she ran before he could argue. The southern reach was hell. Smoke, sand, and fire swirled together in a choking storm. Lydia dove behind a barrier, bullets tearing through the air around her. She spotted an RPG gunner aiming toward the fuel depot. If that went up, the whole base would ignite. She didn't think. She ran. Sprinting across open ground, she tackled the gunner just as he fired. The rocket shot wild, exploding harmlessly into the dirt. They struggled, a brutal, desperate fight in the sand. He swung his rifle. She blocked it with her forearm, pain slicing through her nerves. Then she drove her knife into his chest, once, twice, until he stopped moving. She collapsed beside him, gasping, blood on her hands, heart hammering. Then she heard Rain's voice through the comm. "Myers, status?" "Still standing," she panted, "and your fuel's safe." He laughed, short and ragged. "Remind me to promote you to something after this." "Start with breakfast," she said, pushing herself up. By mid-afternoon, the tide began to turn. Reinforcements finally arrived from the nearby outpost, rolling in with heavy vehicles and suppressive fire. The enemy started to retreat, fading back into the dunes like ghosts. The silence that followed was deafening. Smoke curled into the sky. The wounded cried. The air smelled of gunpowder and victory and grief. Lydia stood in the middle of the wreckage, staring at the battlefield. Her rifle hung loosely at her side, her body shaking with exhaustion. Rains approached slowly. "We held," he said quietly. She nodded, still staring at the smoke. "For now," he followed her gaze. "You saved us again." She turned to him, eyes distant. "No one gets saved out here, Lieutenant. We just run out of reasons to die." He didn't know what to say, so he just stood beside her in silence. That night, the camp was eerily calm. The wounded slept, the fires died down, and the stars returned. Lydia sat alone by the ruins of the mess hall, a small lantern flickering beside her. In front of her lay a single dog tag, her husband's, resting next to her rifle. She whispered into the darkness, "I did it, Daniel. I made sure they lived." A tear slipped down her cheek, glinting in the lantern light. When Rains found her hours later, she was still sitting there, eyes closed, head bowed, hands resting on her weapon like a soldier at peace. He didn't disturb her. He just stood there for a long moment, quietly saluting the woman who'd gone from just the cook to the soul of their survival. And somewhere deep in the desert, far beyond the dunes, a new wind began to rise, soft, warning, alive. The storm wasn't finished. Not yet. End of part 5. The storm had passed, but it left ghosts in its wake. For 3 days, the base was a graveyard of silence. The smoke had cleared, the fires had died, but the air was still thick with the memory of what had happened. Every wall bore scars, bullet holes, scorch marks, and the dark stains that would never wash away. Lydia Myers moved through the wreckage like a shadow. She wasn't wearing her apron anymore. She didn't cook, didn't talk, didn't rest. She just moved, checking on the wounded, helping the medics, and cleaning her rifle over and over like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to this world. She'd been in wars before. She'd seen death up close, felt its breath. But something about this time was different. Maybe because she'd promised herself she'd left that life behind. Maybe because, for the first time, she had something to lose again. One evening, Rains found her sitting on a half-collapsed crate behind the mess hall, staring into the desert. "You haven't eaten in 2 days," he said softly. "Neither have you," she replied without looking at him. He sighed and sat beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. The desert stretched out before them, endless, unforgiving. "You've been quiet," he said finally. "Quiet's safer," she murmured. "People who talk too much in war zones don't live long." He gave a dry laugh. "You really don't turn it off, do you?" Her eyes flicked toward him. "Can you?" Rains didn't answer. He just looked down at the sand, remembering the men they'd lost. The screams. The smell. The sound of Lydia's rifle cutting through chaos. "You saved us, Myers," he said after a long silence. "I don't think anyone else could have done what you did." She looked back toward the horizon. "Don't thank me," she said. "Not for killing. It's not something to be proud of." Rains frowned. "You didn't kill. You defended." "Tell that to the ghosts," she said quietly. "They don't care what side you're on." That night, Lydia dreamed again. She was back in Iraq, a different war, a different life. Her husband, Daniel, was beside her, laughing softly as he cleaned his rifle. His smile was easy, gentle, the kind of calm only someone born for chaos could have. "Always check the scope before dawn," he told her, voice steady. "The light changes everything." She smiled. You and your scopes. He winked. You'd miss half your shots without me. Then came the explosion. Sudden, blinding. The world turned white, then red, then gone. When Lydia woke, her hands were shaking. The lantern beside her flickered, and Daniel's dog tag hung cold against her chest. Still here, she whispered. Still watching. The next morning, Diaz came running into the camp square, clutching a datapad. Lieutenant, you need to see this. Raines took it, scanning the transmission logs. His eyes narrowed. Where did you get this? Intercepted radio chatter, sir. Local frequencies. They were talking about her. Both men looked toward the mess hall. Lydia was outside, refilling the water barrels. Raines called her over. Myers, we need to talk. She walked up slowly, reading the tension on his face. What's going on? He handed her the pad. This was intercepted last night. Listen. The recording was scratchy, distorted by static, but the words were unmistakable. The American woman, the sniper. She's alive. Confirm. Repeat. The widow is alive. Lydia froze. The blood drained from her face. Raines frowned. Who's the widow? She didn't answer right away. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the pad down. It was a call sign, she said finally. Mine. Raines stared at her. Yours? She nodded. From my last deployment. After Daniel was killed, I took over his post. We were deep behind enemy lines, recon, overwatch, long-range support. They called me the widow because... She trailed off. Because you killed the man who killed him, Raines finished quietly. She didn't deny it. But that was years ago, he said. How the hell do they still know you? Because some enemies never forget, Lydia said, her voice flat. And I thought I buried that name. Raines rubbed his temple. So this isn't just about the SEALs anymore. They're here for you. Looks that way. He looked at her, jaw tight. You could leave. We can get you on a convoy out by morning. She shook her head. If I leave, they'll follow. And they'll kill anyone who helped me. No, I stay. Myers, no. She cut in, voice steel. I finish what I started. For the next 2 days, she barely slept. She trained the younger soldiers, taught them better positioning, better cover, better patience. She moved like a ghost through the base, efficient, focused, unreadable. Raines watched her, wondering who she really was. Beneath the quiet discipline, he saw something else, guilt. A weight she carried like armor. On the third night, he found her sitting on the roof again, scope in hand, staring toward the horizon. You really think they'll come for you? He asked. I don't think, she said softly. I know. He hesitated. And if they do? She smiled faintly. Then they'll find the widow waiting. At dawn, a dust storm rolled in, fierce, blinding. Visibility dropped to nothing. The camp sealed itself in, waiting it out. That's when the gunfire started. Through the wind and dust, muzzle flashes lit the haze. Bullets tore into the fencing. Someone shouted, Contact! They're inside. Raines grabbed his rifle and ran. All units, defensive positions. We're under attack. Lydia was already there, eyes scanning through the shifting sand. The storm made it impossible to see, but her instincts didn't need eyes. They're using the storm for cover, she said. Smart. How many? Too many. She lifted her rifle, peering through the scope. Shapes moved through the orange dust, fast, silent, coordinated. Her heart pounded. They found me. The attack was brutal, short range, personal. The sound of gunfire was swallowed by the storm, turning the battle into chaos. Lydia moved through it like a phantom, firing, reloading, disappearing into the wind. She fought with precision, not rage. Every shot mattered. Every movement was survival. But then she heard it. A voice, faint through the cones, speaking Arabic, distorted by static. "The widow dies today." She froze. The voice was familiar. It couldn't be. She turned toward the ridge, scanning desperately. A figure stood there, tall, scarred, face half covered by a scarf. His rifle was aimed at her. Lydia's breath caught. She knew that stance. She knew that man. "Daniel?" she whispered. But no, it wasn't him. It was Khalid, the warlord responsible for Daniel's death, the one she'd thought she killed years ago. He was alive, and he'd come for her. A gunshot rang out, sharp, clean. Lydia ducked behind cover, the bullet grazing her arm. Rain's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Myers, report." "He's here," she said, her voice low and cold. "The ghost I couldn't kill. What are you talking about?" "End this storm," she replied, chambering another round. "And I'll end him." The wind screamed louder, whipping sand into her eyes, stinging her skin. She moved through it, slow and deliberate, stalking her enemy through the veil of dust. Every step was memory. Every heartbeat was vengeance. When she finally saw him again, she didn't hesitate. Their rifles fired almost simultaneously, 2 cracks slicing through the storm. Then silence. The desert swallowed the sound. When the wind finally died and the dust cleared, Rains found her kneeling in the sand, rifle beside her, a faint trail of blood on her sleeve. A few meters away lay Khalid, still, unmoving, the wind gently covering him with dust. Lydia stared at the horizon, her expression unreadable. "It's over," Rains said softly. She shook her head. "Not for me." And as the dawn broke over the wrecked base, Lydia Myers, the cook, the sniper, the widow, finally understood that peace wasn't something you won. It was something you bought, piece by piece, with everything you had left. The desert was quiet for the first time in days. The kind of quiet that carried the weight of every life lost, every bullet fired, and every memory that refused to fade. Lydia Myers sat on the edge of a sand dune, the early morning sun burning her back, rifle resting beside her. Around her, the SEALs moved quietly, tending to the wounded, salvaging supplies, and repairing fences. But Lydia didn't watch them. She watched the horizon, the wind stirring the dust like it carried whispers of the past. She had survived the storm. She had killed Khalid. But survival had a taste she didn't recognize, hollow, bitter, and relentless. Rains approached, cautious but firm. "You all right?" he asked. Lydia didn't answer right away. She traced the edges of Daniel's dog tag beneath her shirt, feeling the cold metal press against her chest. "I am," she said finally. "But nothing ends cleanly. Not here, not ever." He nodded, understanding. "The SEALs are safe. The base held. You." He paused, unsure. "You changed everything today." She didn't look at him. "I only did what was necessary." Rains sighed. "Necessary sometimes isn't enough to keep ghosts from following you." Lydia closed her eyes. Ghosts. That word carried weight she hadn't admitted in years. The soldiers she saved, the enemies she killed, Daniel's face, they all lingered in the corners of her mind. She could run, disappear, even return to cooking meals for those who had no idea who she once was. But the ghosts never left. Later that morning, the intelligence officer called Rains and Lydia to the command tent. They had recovered encrypted files from Khalid's communications. Rains handed the tablet to Lydia. "You should see this." She scrolled through, her stomach tightening. Hidden inside the messages were coordinates, plans, and, buried deep, something that made her blood run cold. "Daniel," she whispered. Rains looked at her, frowning. "What is it?" Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled to a document labeled Operation Black Falcon. It detailed her husband's final mission, a covert reconnaissance assignment that had gone wrong. Daniel's team had been compromised. The report confirmed Khalid had survived that ambush. "He knew I was coming," Lydia said, voice low and steady. "That's why this war never ended. That's why he's alive until now." Rain's eyes widened. "So everything you're past, this attack, it was personal?" She nodded. "It's never been about territory or power. It's about revenge. For him. For Daniel." Later that evening, Lydia walked alone to the edge of the desert. She carried nothing but a canteen and her dog tag, her rifle left behind. The sand stretched endlessly, and the sky turned copper with the setting sun. She knelt, letting her fingers brush the warm grains. Memories came unbidden. Daniel laughing, the flash of explosions, the screams of men she couldn't save, and the orders she'd followed without question. "You waited for me," she whispered into the wind. "I didn't fail you. I won't." A soft breeze carried the echo of a voice she hadn't heard in years. "You did, Lydia." Her heart skipped. She blinked, but the desert remained empty. Some ghosts never die, she realized. They only wait. The following morning, Rains called her into his office. His tone was serious, the kind of gravity Lydia respected. "Lydia, you can't stay here," he said bluntly. "Not with what you know now, not after today. The higher-ups want you debriefed, removed from the front lines. There's a plane out by sunrise." She crossed her arms. "Leave?" "Yes. You've done more than anyone could ask. You saved lives. You changed this battle." She shook her head. "I don't leave. Not yet. Not until every threat from Khalid's network is neutralized. They'll come for me again if I walk away now." Rains leaned back, frustration in his eyes. "You're talking about suicide, Myers." She met his gaze calmly. "I've survived worse. And if I don't finish this, more will die. You know it's true." He fell silent, realizing she meant every word. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Lydia trained SEALs in counter-sniper tactics, recon methods, and stealth operations. Every movement, every command, every calculation was precise. She had the calm focus of someone who had walked through death and back. And at night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed every shot she'd fired, every life she had taken, every whisper of Khalid's voice in the desert winds. The ghosts were patient. One evening, Diaz joined her on the rooftop, carrying a thermos of coffee. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "I do," she replied. "This is mine." He didn't argue. He simply sat beside her, letting the wind wash over them both. Sometimes, she thought, it was easier to let someone else carry the weight. But the burden of revenge, of justice, of Daniel, it was hers and hers alone. A week later, the command received intelligence that Khalid's top lieutenants were gathering at a compound 10 miles from the base. Lydia volunteered immediately. "You sure about this?" Rains asked, concern etched across his face. "Yes," she said simply. "I've waited long enough to face the rest of them." Rains hesitated, then nodded. "We move at first light." "But Myers, be careful. Don't let the widow take control entirely." She didn't answer. She only checked her rifle, tightened her vest, and prepared. That night, she lay on the roof again, staring at the stars, thinking of Daniel. His memory guided her, gave her strength. Tomorrow, the final chapter would begin, a reckoning for the lives taken, the war unfinished, and the ghosts who demanded closure. At dawn, Lydia led a small team toward the compound. Every footstep was silent, every shadow studied, every instinct alert. The desert had taught her patience, discipline, and timing. When they arrived, the compound was quiet, too quiet. Surveillance drones had been disabled, and sensors were silent. Lydia's heart pounded in anticipation. She crouched behind a wall, peering through her scope. Inside, she saw them. College lieutenants, armed, unaware of her presence. "This is it," she whispered. "Time to finish it." One by one, she picked her targets, her shots precise, controlled, and deadly. Each bullet was a statement. The widow had returned, and she was merciless. By the time the sun was fully up, the compound was secure. The enemy lieutenants lay unconscious or captured, and the network that had haunted her for years was finally dismantled. Lydia stepped outside, dust settling on her shoulders, rifle lowered. She exhaled, a weight lifting from her chest. She had faced the ghosts, avenged Daniel, and survived. For the first time in years, Lydia Myers allowed herself a moment of peace, small, fragile, but real. Back at the base, Raines approached her as she cleaned her rifle one last time. "You did it," he said simply. She gave a faint smile. "It's done? For now." He nodded. "Then maybe it's time to stop being the widow." Lydia's eyes lingered on Daniel's dog tag. "Maybe," she whispered. "But some ghosts never leave. You just have to learn to live with them." And with that, she finally walked away from the battlefield. Her rifle slung, dog tag warm against her chest, ready to face whatever the future held, not as a soldier haunted by loss, but as a woman who had survived the impossible and lived to see another dawn. The desert was calm again, but not quiet. Its silence carried memory, the echoes of bullets, explosions, and lives lost. Every scar on the ground told a story, every plume of dust a testament to the chaos that had passed. Lydia Myers walked across the base, her boots crunching against the sand. The air smelled faintly of smoke and dust, mingled with the metallic tongue of spent ammunition. The camp had been rebuilt as best as possible, tents replaced, fences repaired, and the wounded tended. But nothing could erase what had happened. Her rifle was clean, slung across her shoulder. Her dog tag gleamed faintly in the sun, a reminder of Daniel and the battles she had fought, both seen and unseen. The SEALs gathered in the central square, their faces tired but alive. They didn't speak at first, simply looking at her as she approached. Every one of them had been touched by her actions, by her courage, her precision, her willingness to risk herself for others. Lieutenant Raines stepped forward. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by quiet reverence. "Lydia," he began, voice steady but heavy with emotion. "You were more than we ever expected. Not just a sniper, not just a soldier. You were the reason we made it through. Every life saved, every shot fired. That was you. You carried the impossible and made it look effortless." Lydia's lips pressed together. She hadn't come for praise, hadn't come for medals. She'd come to finish what Daniel's mission had begun. Still hearing it, even faintly, pulled at something she had buried long ago. Corporal Diaz stepped up next, limping slightly from a shoulder injury. He tried to smile, though his exhaustion showed. "You didn't just save our lives," he said, voice husky. "You made sure we all got to live to see another sunrise. And," he paused, swallowing hard, "we'll never forget it." The men behind him nodded silently. Each one had their own story of how Lydia's precision, calm under fire, and relentless courage had kept them alive. Lydia felt a lump in her throat, but didn't let it show. Instead, she gave a faint nod. "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "I just did what had to be done. That's all any of us can do." For the next few hours, the base felt strangely normal. The wounded were treated, equipment repaired, and small meals prepared. But Lydia couldn't relax, not entirely. The desert was too vast, too unpredictable. She knew danger could return at any time. She returned to her quarters, cleaned her rifle one last time, and sat on the edge of her bed. Daniel's dog tag rested against her palm. "You're free now," she whispered. "We're done with the ghosts. For now." A breeze swept through the window, rustling the papers on her desk. It felt almost like an answer, soft and distant. The following day, Lydia was called to the command tent once more. Raines met her with a file in his hand. "This is from HQ," he said. "They want a full debriefing. Everything you did, every move you made. They want to know how the cook became the widow. And," he hesitated, "they also want to recommend you for an award. Not just for bravery, but for leadership, strategy, and sheer impact on the mission." Lydia's eyebrows lifted slightly. "An award?" "Yes," Raines said, smiling faintly. "You earned it. And maybe it's time the world knows what you did out here." She didn't answer immediately. The thought of recognition, of acknowledgement, was foreign. But after years of fighting, hiding, and surviving, maybe it was deserved. After the meeting, Lydia walked across the field toward the mess hall, where the men were gathered. For the first time in days, they smiled without fear, joked without tension, and shared quiet laughter over simple meals. Diaz waved her over. "You get to eat first today," he said, grinning. She shook her head. "Not hungry." "Then just sit," he insisted. "You've earned it. Every single one of us knows it." She allowed herself a seat, the weight of the past days heavy, but strangely manageable. Around her, the SEALs spoke quietly, sharing stories of the firefight, the ambush, and how Lydia's precise shots had turned the tide. They didn't speak her name often, but when they did, it carried reverence, the way soldiers honor those who walked into fire and came back unscathed. As the sun began to set, Lydia stood alone on the edge of the base once more. The desert glowed gold and crimson, stretching endlessly. The wind was warm, soft against her face. She lifted her rifle, glanced down at Daniel's dog tag, and exhaled deeply. "This is it," she whispered. "No more ghosts." Somewhere far across the dunes, a lone echo carried the sound of a single shot fired long ago, a memory of the battlefield and the life she had chosen to reclaim. The echo wasn't loud, but it was permanent. It would linger in the minds of those who survived, a reminder of the woman who had been just the cook, until one shot changed everything. That night, the men gathered around a small fire, recounting the events. They spoke of bravery, precision, and sacrifice, but above all, of Lydia Myers, not as a cook, not as a sniper, not even as the widow, but as someone who embodied courage, resilience, and unwavering loyalty. Raines approached her quietly. "You saved more than lives," he said softly. "You gave us hope." Lydia shook her head. "Hope is fragile," she replied, "but it's worth holding on to." He smiled faintly, handing her a small medal in a case. "Then hold on to this. We'll make sure history remembers it too." For a moment, Lydia stared at the medal. It wasn't just metal. It was acknowledgement of pain endured, battles fought, and lives saved. She nodded, silently accepting it. The next morning, Lydia prepared to leave the base. She had survived the impossible, faced every ghost, and exacted justice where it was needed. The desert lay behind her, vast and unyielding, but now peaceful in a way she could finally accept. Diaz ran up, handing her a small bundle. "A little something for the road," he said. She smiled faintly. "Thank you." The SEALs gathered, standing at attention. Their eyes spoke more than words could: gratitude, respect, and admiration. "Remember," Diaz said quietly, "we'll never forget what you did here." "None of us will." Lydia nodded, feeling the weight of their words. She turned toward the horizon, dog tag in hand, rifle slung over her shoulder, and began walking. Each step took her farther from the battlefield and closer to a life she hadn't imagined she'd get to live again. As she disappeared into the desert, the wind carried the echoes of gunfire, shouts, and survival. Stories of courage, determination, and sacrifice would linger. The story of a woman who had been underestimated, overlooked, and labeled just the cook. But one shot had changed everything. The SEALs would tell the story for years to come. And somewhere in the distance, a single echo carried across the field, a reminder that bravery, when guided by loyalty and love, could leave a mark no one would ever forget. Lydia Myers had walked through fire, faced every ghost, and emerged unbroken. The desert was quiet now. But the legend of the widow, the cook-turned-savior, would echo across the field forever.